auf unserem eigenen Territorium auch nicht bereits regulären Soldaten geschossen.
Yet perhaps your music collection says even more about your notions of identity and values.
The year is 1983. A young English musician by the name of William Bennett has just brought the latest record from his heavily experimental electronic group, Whitehouse, to a rough trade to be distributed. The record, titled Right to Kill, dedicated to Dennis Andrew Nilsson, was brought in by Bennett, who, according to rumors, was dressed in full Nazi uniform, which was untrue, and was quickly met with outrage and disgust as the box of records was literally tossed at Bennett and he was asked to leave. Rumors like this only help cement the outlandish infamy and legacy of legendary power electronics outfit, Whitehouse, as well as Bennett's label, Come Organization, causing them to be some of the most revered but extremely misunderstood projects within the genre. Today, I want to share a little bit of history on this amazing label of extreme self-expression, to discuss some of the artists, talk about misunderstood ideals, and to help celebrate 40 years since its inception. Despite only being active a short time and ending in 1980, with the return of Whitehouse from their hiatus and Bennett's new label, Susan Lawley, even after 40 years, the infamy and influence, as well as the messages of this excellent extreme electronic music, can still be felt even today. From the beginning, let's start with William Bennett himself, a man who was easily pleased, never satisfied. As a child, Bennett did not have much access in ways of listening to music, and would go to record stores just to longingly stare at the LP covers and fantasize about what they could possibly sound like. Upon being able to finally experience these albums, he was understandably disappointed with most music, as it could not live up to the fantasies he had had. However, Bennett had soon become enamored with the LP Fly from famous avant-garde artist Yoko Ono, and felt that with her music, he had finally heard something he felt was akin to his fantasies. This love for more experimental electronic music came full force with Bennett's newfound friendship with touring artist Daniel Miller, the founder of Mute Records and of the group The Normal, with their hit single Warm Leatherette, and with famous sound collage and industrial artist Stephen Stapleton, with his project Nurse with Wound. Miller would share his knowledge of obscure and pure electronic albums with Bennett, and Stapleton is well known for his obsession of very off-the-beaten-path music and rare record collecting. Bennett would soon find music that he had only dreamed of in artists such as Alvin Lucier and Cro-Magnon, with their extremely ahead of their time and experimental album, Orgasm. Bennett had also found his love for Italo disco and soundtracks from the golden age of pornography, including the soundtrack for Linda Lovelace's Deep Throat. Bennett is also a heavy reader of the Marquis de Sade and has read his work in the original French language and gleaned heavy influences from such works as Justine and, of course, the 120 Days of Sodom. Sade's extreme libertarian self-expression is reflected in Whitehouse's own work, as well as topics of peculiar serial killers, sadism, masochism, sex, eating disorders, and abuse and self-abuse. A common misconception is that Whitehouse is obsessed with sex murderers and being as sadistic as possible, when Bennett is only interested in certain people and certain topics that he finds interesting and becomes obsessed with. The notion that however you view the acts of serial killers, it can't be denied that they have their own unique self-expression. It is a prevalent topic within Whitehouse's music. The other element is that Whitehouse comes from the standpoint of sympathy for the abused rather than the pleasure of the abuser, as many would think.
I mean, I think there's an interesting point here, is that with all the, that a lot of the bands that have tried to imitate Whitehouse, they focus on this sort of authoritarian element of them, this sadist, this archetype sadist. But I think they're completely missing the point, because really what Whitehouse is all about, and again people might be surprised to hear this, is that it wouldn't work if there wasn't an incredible sensitivity to the people in this case, suffering, and understanding them at their level. And the understanding is at their level. It's not the understanding of the person dishing out the punishment or the treatment or the whatever.
Whitehouse uses extreme electronic music to shock the listener and bring them to an almost trance-like state. The wonderful EDP wasp and harsh vocals of Bennett have had made a huge, lasting impression on music as a whole, and have helped to create its own scene with other fantastic artists and many imitators who seem to miss the original intention. Now that we have a brief overview of Bennett and Whitehouse, let's discuss William Bennett's original label, Come Organization. Before Whitehouse and after his first group, Essential Logic, Bennett's next project, Come, was the original band and reason for the creation of Come Organization label. Come was an early experimental project that was anti-rock and roll and was a collab effort between William Bennett, J.G. Thirlwell, who would go off to be his own infamous figure in the industrial and no-wave world with his project Scraping Fetus Off the Wheel, and Daniel Miller, who was the founder of the very well-known and respected electronic label Mute Records. The group was started in 1979 and disbanded in 1980 so Bennett could pursue his new project, Whitehouse. Come Org, as it is known by some, was created because Bennett could not find another label that was willing to put the group's work out. The name was inspired by a pornography company known as Private Organization, which ironically is also the company that publishes the Whitehouse magazine that the project is named after. The name is also a double entendre, with Whitehouse being the last name of Mary Whitehouse, who was anti-pornography campaigner. Come's first record was a 7-inch with the tracks Come Sunday and Shaved Slits. Bennett was only able to sell 25 of these to Rough Trade, but fortunately, someone else from a record export company called him and asked to buy about 700 of them, proving that there was indeed a growing interest in this so-called left-field music. Come had a few more records, such as Rampton and the I'm Jack EP. The band never performed live. Soon Come Org would become the label to put out Bennett's now main project, Whitehouse. However, this label would also soon become the home of other new and emerging extreme self-expressionists, as well as recordings from certain infamous serial killers. Come Org's full catalog would end up including the titular group Come, Whitehouse, Sutcliffe Jügend, Charles Manson, The New Order, Rectifier, Maurizio Bianchi, Nurse with Wound, and interesting recordings from peculiar people such as film director Leni Riefenstahl and serial killers Dennis Nilsen, Ted Bundy, and Ed Kemper. Bennett had also written a zine at this time called Kata, which was inspired by the industrial newsletter being put out by Throbbing Gristle. These zines are all collected into a very rare book collection called Birth Death. The most beneficial thing Bennett had done for his label was adding a mailing address on the back of the records. Now, anyone interested could ask for records right from the source, and could now send rare tapes and music to Bennett and share ideals and letters to build a unique community that otherwise may have not found itself on its own in an era without internet. Now, let's move on a bit from Bennett and his work on Come Org and move to another powerful name within the label. The man is Kevin Tompkins. The project is Sutcliffe Jügend. Tompkins was originally heavily into post-punk, with the likes of Joy Division, Birthday Party, and Suicide. Soon he discovered early industrial in the forms of Throbbing Gristle, Nurse with Wound, and of course Whitehouse, and wanted to make music that was somewhere in the middle and would fit right in with the ideals and sound of Come Organization. Tompkins would start his own project in 1982 with fellow musician Paul Taylor called Sutcliffe Jügend. The name was inspired by Peter Sutcliffe, who was also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, a prolific serial killer who killed over 13 women in West Yorkshire and Manchester, England. It is now serving over 20 life sentences in prison. The Jügend also standing more for Sutcliffe's children rather than youth. True to its devious and darkly humorous name, Sutcliffe Jügend would go on to be considered one of the most darkest and harshest of the power electronics genre. However, to say that Tompkins and Taylor only made power electronics in the same vein as Whitehouse would be a vast misconception of their talent. The group would find itself taking on other genres as well, such as glitch, ambient, dark ambient, and field recordings, with albums such as Blue Rabbit, The Muse, and Relentless, all of which still hold the same fervor and harsh artistic value as the original power electronic works. Sutcliffe Jügend started off on Come Organization with the now highly rare and valuable tape Campaign. Sutcliffe Jügend was brutal avant-garde electronic sound right from the beginning with this tape, and would soon be fulfilled even more with the infamous 10-tape album release titled We Spit on Their Graves. This is a brutal cut with lots of excellent electronic loops, cuts, and sampling with intense vocals, yells, screams, and topics, making this a great release and one to solidify themselves as a group to not just be left behind in a miscellaneous genre. The music itself has a lot of irony and dark humor within it, and is of much of the music on the label not condemning nor condoning any action, only stating the transgression. Tompkins would go on to say that his personal ideals and personality are far different from what he portrays on Sutcliffe Jügend, and it was one of the main reasons the group took a long hiatus until 1994, after their releases with Come Org and Tompkins touring and playing in the group Whitehouse, so that he could leave the scene for a more normal life. Tompkins and Paul Taylor would go on to form another group with artist Gary Keane called Body Choke, a more noise rock outfit. Body Choke would go on to release 3 albums and 1 compilation. Eventually, Sutcliffe Jügend would return in 1995 and start creating more genre-defying albums and going on highly intense live show tours. The group has over 30 releases, and as of 2019, has finally ended with Tompkins stating that they had achieved all they could under the name Sutcliffe Jügend. Their influences and voice on Come Org, Whitehouse, and even the electronic genre as a whole could not easily be forgotten, and much modern power electronics owes their sound to them. Longtime friend and collaborator Stephen Stapleton had already been making a name for himself with the sound collage art project Nurse with Wound. Originally starting out as a trio between friends who were obsessed with obscure krautrock and electronic records, it eventually became the personal main project of Stapleton, with a massive discography and outstanding legacy within the electronic world. Nurse with Wound has released more than 150 albums, and the genres range from industrial, noise, dark ambient, sound collage, ambient, spoken word, and distorted pop music. Stapleton has referred to the project as a contemporary extension of surrealism, and the project has been referred to as purveyors of sinister whimsy to the wretched. It makes sense that he found his way onto Come Organization, being within the same mindset as William Bennett and the other artists on the label. Soon a collaboration between the two happened in a project humorously called The 150 Murderous Passions, or Those Belonging to the Fourth Class, composing the 28 days of February, spent hearing the narrations of Madame Desranges, interested amongst which are the scandalous doings at the chateau during that month, aptly named after 120 Days of Sodom by Marquise de Sade. This project had only one release on Come Organization, called The 150 Murderous Passions. The album has 2 untitled tracks, with Stapleton creating the longer and Bennett creating the shorter track. This is a heavy, hard-hitting project that sounds exactly how an industrial sound collage would sound, with Whitehouse's signature aggression. Unfortunately, due to issues on distribution and who owns what on what label, there have been many releases of this project, many with terrible mixes. Bennett's current label, Susan Lawley, released the original mix from Come Org on their Whitehouse compilation, Cream of the Second Coming. Stapleton may have also had a hand, with Bennett, in one of the one-off albums on Come Org, by the group The New Order. They put out only one album called The Bradford Light District. an experimental and noisy field recording album that includes sounds that can be heard within the 150 Murderous Passions, helping to verify the notion that Stapleton was involved. If you would like to learn more about Nurse with Moon and the early industrial scene in England, check out the book England's Hidden Reverse, A Secret History of the Esoteric Underground by David Keenan. Speaking of one-off albums on Come Organization, there's a great little noisy industrial album called Atonement by Rectifier. I could not find much information on this release, but knowing the sound, it could very well be another collab or one of the other artists on Come Org. Either way, it's definitely worthy of your time, despite it only being a 7-inch with 2 tracks. Now let's discuss the project on Come Org, known as Leibstandarte SSMB. This is actually Maurizio Bianchi, also known as just MB, and by his other project, Sacred Pelts, a well-known and respected Italian industrial noise artist. He's considered an early pioneer in the noise genre and has released a considerable amount of material, more than 250 releases to be exact, and has worked with many other industrial artists such as 8-Tracks Morgue, Merzbow, Nurse with Moon, Francisco Lopez, Konrad Schnitzler, and so many more. He originally was a zine writer and music critic, but around 1980, he felt it was time for him to add his take on music and started making cut-up noise. He became well known for his famous album, Symphony for a Genocide, originally put out on Sterile Records. This record was a powerful look into the fear and overwhelming harsh feelings of the terror of war crimes and death and genocide. MB made this record with a strong empathetic feel towards victims of Auschwitz and other camps around the world. A somber and powerful album with tracks all consisting of a never-changing hissing or clanking rhythm, electronic effects over the top, and a wall of distortion. This album is a good example of some of MB's earlier work, as well as the albums on Come Org. However, the name Leibstandarte SSMB and the Hitler speeches and Nazi aesthetic overdubs on the albums was put on by William Bennett without MB's knowledge or consent. Nigel Aries of Nocturnal Emissions is quoted as saying, "William Bennett told me in '81, the first and last time I met him, that Steve Stapleton drew up a joke contract for him, giving Maurizio absolutely no rights to the recording in any way whatsoever, which Maurizio happily signed unknowingly. Because of this, MB has disowned these records as some of his first releases. That does not take away the amazing craft and care that is put into some of these amazingly noisy and drony pieces. Tracks such as Endoriation and Scent showcase such raw and powerful electronic music in its purest form. MB would have 3 of these reworked albums of his put out on Come Org: Triumph of the Will, Weltanschauung, and Menses. MB still makes music in 2019 and still shows that he is one of the strongest and unique voices in the electronic noise world. Come Organization has also released a few interesting oddities that definitely fall into the genre's ideals of extreme self-expression and transgression. Such interesting tapes would include a soundtrack for the very infamous propaganda film Triumph of the Will, directed by Leni Riefenstahl. Leni Riefenstahl, who is best known for her film Olympia on the 1936 Berlin Summer Games, was a famous German director who would go on to create what some consider some of the greatest propaganda films ever created. Whether you consider her films works of art as a trailblazing pioneer or works of pure evil from a Nazi worshipper, she is still known as one of the most famous female directors in the world. Another interesting batch of tapes would be the releases in Charles Manson's name. There are 3 tapes. 2 of them are Manson family interviews, and 1 contains an NBC interview. Manson has long been a talked-about figure within the industrial scene since the beginning, being such an eccentric individual with extremely detached ideals. In the same way Nazi imagery, cults, and serial killers were used within the scene, Manson and his crimes were used to push the audience to their most uncomfortable state and rip apart the so-called flower children ideals from the 1960s and 70s. More of these serial killer tapes can be found on the label, including the entire audio from the documentary Murder, No Apparent Motive from 1984. This tape is credited to Ted Bundy and Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, on the label. Cum Organization is now defunct. William Bennett has since been active on the new label, Susan Lawley, where he has been putting out all Whitehouse and Cut Hand's work. Despite only being active a few years and having a rather small catalog, the scene and music that the label has created and inspired cannot be taken for granted. There is so much to talk about and things I didn't even touch upon or mention, but I wanted to give a nice basic overview of everything. Also know that Cum.org does not represent the scene as a whole. There is so much, including the massive Finnish and Japanese scene, that grew isolated from the influence from other scenes. This is just a good look into the beginnings of what is well known and respected within the genre, and having some of the greatest influence. If you want further reading, I highly suggest the book Fight Your Own War, Power Electronics and Noise Culture by Jennifer Wallace. This book is printed like a zine and is packed with so much information and recommendations, it could be almost too much to take in the best way possible.